Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. The European Union is moving into a new fiscal era, proposing a €1.8 trillion budget for 2028 to 2034, paired with a major shift in European defence through the €150 billion SAFE fund to scale joint military production and strengthen readiness with NATO. Yet disagreements persist over how to finance defence and whether non-EU partners, especially the UK, can take part on fair terms. With Brexit still shaping cooperation, London and Brussels now face a critical test in rebuilding security ties. We're joined now by Iain Begg. He's a Professorial Research Fellow at the London School of Economics. Iain, welcome back to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Nice to see you again.
So how would you compare this latest budget with the one that's currently in force?
Well, it's for 7 years, as you said. The 1.8 trillion sounds like an enormous number, but if you relate it to the gross domestic product, the size of the EU economy, it's barely 1.1 percentage points of that gross domestic product. That compares with a typical member state central government budget, which is of the order of 20 to 30% of GDP. And even in the US, the federal budget is 23% of GDP. So that tells you that in relative terms, it's actually quite a small budget, especially when you consider it spread over 7 years and will be dispersed in 27 countries.
Smaller than the one that's currently in force?
It's slightly bigger, but that's a proposal. The Commission always proposes a little bit above what the member states are prepared to tolerate. The immediate reaction in July, when the new ideas were put forward, it took the Dutch Finance Ministry about 20 minutes to say no, it's too big. The Germans were very slow. It took until later the same evening before the Chancellery there said no. Other member states welcome it because they can see that they get advantages from it, but it's going to be a hard slog reaching a reconciliation between these competing perspectives.
Right. Now, in terms of, it's a little bit bigger, and we shall see what it ends up as. But there have been other changes made, have there not? So, for example, simplification in the processes. What can you tell us about those?
Well, every single budget or budget proposal that is issued by the Commission, the word simplification is prominent. I think it's fair to say nobody ever talks about complexification, and yet it ends up being complex. What's been proposed this time is to rationalize the many spending lines in the EU budget into just 4 funds. The fourth is small, that's the administration. The first is called National and Regional Partnership Plans, which brings together many of the things we've been used to in previous EU budgets, most particularly the support for farmers and the support for regional development. The second fund is called the Competitiveness Fund. It will include a significantly higher budget for research, as well as other initiatives to deal with the shortcomings perceived in Europe, for example, through the Draghi report issued last year, which said Europe is falling behind other parts of the global economy and needs to do something to make itself more competitive. And the third fund is Europe in the World, which has a straightforward and a fairly obvious purpose, which is to promote economic development in other parts of the world and help various countries.
Right, so it seems as though Europe is acknowledging that there are areas of its budget or its activities which have been underfunded, thus leading to the risk of a lack of competitiveness. What about the area of defence, bearing in mind Russia's invasion or full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Well, defence is problematic because it's not a competence of the European Union. Therefore, it has to skate around direct funding of defence expenditure, which is why what you mentioned at the outset, the SAFE fund, is based on borrowing by the European level, which is then lent on to individual member states to support their procurement of defence equipment. It is not direct expenditure on EU defence, as you would understand it in the Polish budget or the French budget or any other budget.
But surely there has to be an acknowledgement that defence has to be part of the European Union budget. I mean, at the end of the day, the EU is producing, as you say, larger quantities of military equipment, ammunition and so on. So it does acknowledge that there is a threat, and it acknowledges it needs to do something about it. Surely it makes sense to have a budget for it.
It may make sense, and there's a certain logic to saying push defence expenditure to the highest level of government, which in this case would be the EU, but you're bound by what the treaty says, and the EU is not allowed through the treaty to spend money directly on defence. It can't employ soldiers. Instead, what it does is to go round this obstacle by facilitating defence procurement by the individual countries. It's not something that if you were sitting down with a blank piece of paper and saying, how do I design this, you would come up with, but it's a hard reality.
Okay, now there is something called the SAFE Fund, for which 150 billion euros is being allocated. What's that all about?
The SAFE Fund is a facility which enables the European Union to borrow from financial markets. It then offers the opportunity for member states to take some of that borrowed money to allocate to defence. The advantage for some member states is that they're able, because the European Commission is doing the borrowing rather than them, they can do so on more favourable terms for financial markets. It is, however, different from a conventional defence budget, where tax money is used to pay for soldiers and equipment. This is based on borrowed money, and that difference is crucial.
Right. Now, this fund is available to non-EU states as well, including the UK. But there seems to be a bit of disagreement between the UK and EU in terms of the UK's contribution to the fund. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the UK is concerned that they're being asked to pay in hard cash as opposed to borrowing, and that they're not, strictly speaking, going to be entitled to borrow directly from the fund, only to cooperate with another country in making procurement more efficient. So the UK itself, facing a quite severe fiscal squeeze, is very uneasy about having this obstacle put in its way of getting access to the EU money.
Right, so it sounds as though they feel that they're giving, but they're not getting enough in return. Professor Begg, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks, but as always, don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.